right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Hoddercast. Today is October 14th, and we have a very special guest, Bill Wise. Bill has been a law clerk at Hodder Law Firm for the past couple months, and very grateful to all the wonderful work you've contributed, Bill, and wanted to take this opportunity today just to, you've got a lot of great opinions on things, and I thought we'd just go through some of the news in crypto this week.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for having me. And of course, it's a pleasure working at Hodder Law Firm and a great experience. So I'm excited to dig into everything.
Awesome. Well, first, why don't you give us a little background of yourself and how you got involved in the Bitcoin and crypto space?
Yeah, so I got into crypto in 2019, actually through a buddy. I'd always been peripherally aware of the crypto space, but never enough interest to really like dive in until my friend was like, "Oh, have you heard of Chainlink?" Right? And I'm like, interesting. So I took a look and it all seemed, very fascinating because I was always a, computer technology oriented person. And I guess crypto, I never read into it where I could really connect kind of those interests of finance and technology. And I proceeded to buy $40 worth of XLM. That was my first crypto. So congrats, Stellar. And I remember at the time I had to buy ETH on Coinbase and then transfer it to Exodus and then swap for the Stellar. So it was amazing how far we've come, since then.
Nice. Yeah, I funny you say Chainlink. I used to be a member of a dojo, a Muay Thai dojo in DC with my friend Adela. She was partners like sparring partners with this guy at the dojo who was so into Chainlink, and yeah, he was just, and I remember thinking it was just not a serious coin. I kind of come from more of the Bitcoin maximalist side.
Yeah.
I was thinking, oh man, this poor guy's gonna lose all his money on Chainlink, but like I didn't say anything. But man, did it ever go up from there. I was like kicking myself afterwards. I'm like, why did
The
I
Oracle problem, Sasha, the Oracle problem.
yeah, right.
Yeah, it's the crypto assets create cults of I want to say cult of personality, but it's really more of like cult of money, I suppose, more so than any other asset. Perhaps maybe the meme stocks, but Chainlink had this just rabid following where they'd make memes, they'd post on the forums, or there'd always be Chainlink threads, people going, "Oh, we're all going to be rich," And I don't know if any of them really understood the Oracle problem, but that was a common refrain. And that was wild to me because I'm like, I don't see Microsoft stock people acting like this,
Yeah.
but crypto's got kind of that. It's not just financial; it's like a cultural pull as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what are your goals like as a crypto attorney? What kind of impact do you want to have on the space?
Yeah, so I think there's kind of two main points for me going for crypto law. And I think the first point is I am, as they would say, a true believer. So like never selling, right? To my detriment in some cases. But
In
I
the
think
long run, it'll be to your benefit, I
it's all
think.
gonna go up. It's gonna go back up.
Yeah.
Um, but as a believer, I really think the technology coins aside, whether crypto, the same tokens are going to be around in 10 years, I think is probably up for healthy debate. But the blockchain technology in and of itself, I think has the capacity to really reform finance so that it's more efficient. We can eliminate a lot of middlemen, we can eliminate uncertainty, and efficiency is obviously always good. But more so, it gives access to people, it gives people access to financial markets in ways that really they never had before. You look at all these countries where governments mismanage the currency, for example, and you've got these hardworking people who just see their life savings wiped out in the blink of an eye due to something they really can't control. And for them, Western regulated markets are for the most part out of reach. Crypto gives these people in some ways a way out, and that process, that path is going to change. And there's certainly pitfalls, right? With what coins you buy, some go up, some go down. But I think ultimately, from at least the viewpoint of crypto can improve finance for everybody, around the world. So that's kind of why I can tell myself as a lawyer, I'm going to help blaze that trail to make this technology, more accessible to everyone and kind of bring blockchain to its fullest potential. So that's kind of the philosophical reason. The other reason is I think that there's not a lot of people who know traditional finance and law and blockchain technology, in equal kind of expertise.
Mm-hmm.
I'd say in my school, which it limited sample size, but at my law school, I don't think I've run into a single person who knows about blockchain like I do. Everyone's like, oh yeah, the Bitcoin, right? They're like, but it's not real. And I'm like, oh my goodness, where do I even start?
I know.
So I'm hoping that I'm kind of ahead of the curve on this one, and looking forward to joining the job market next year. But
Yeah.
I think professionally, it's a good path.
Agreed. Yeah. When I was in school, it was even earlier. And same thing. I just, after using Bitcoin once, like every time I went to a vending machine and I'd have to, get cash out to buy my, candy bar at school or something, I just always thought, why am I not holding my phone up and a Bitcoin wallet transaction happening here? Like, this is just, now they have, phones, like the Apple Pay and stuff is a lot more
Yeah.
advanced, but for a good couple years before Venmo or anything, it was just Bitcoin was there and it wasn't being used for, nearly all the potential it could be. And anytime you would talk about it with people, it was just met with scorn. Like you said, oh, what backs that? It's just a fad, or all these different rhetorics. And it's like, oh man, just these people are just missing the boat. This is the technology of the future. And from a practical standpoint, as a crypto lawyer, it's a very I don't want to sound crass, but it's a lucrative position because there's not a lot of crypto lawyers out there. There's certainly more and more lawyers joining the field every day, or, every cohort of people that are graduating. I think there's a few people in every class, probably like yourself, that are, focused on it and tuned in. But the vast majority of people still go into insurance law or just really boring topics. I met with one of my former classmates and she was telling me she works on auto glass insurance, declining people from getting their windshield fixed. I thought, oh my God, I would die if that's what I do all day.
What a way to go. But I don't judge. If you like doing that, be my guest.
Yeah.
I'll take the Bitcoins myself.
Yeah. And it's just, you get the chance to work with really intelligent companies. Like these are everyone that, as I'm sure you've already seen, that of the projects that we're working on together, it's you're working with these founders that have a real vision on making the world better, and you hear that in all the Silicon Valley talk, oh, we want to make the world a better place. But, who's really working on trying to do that? It's the people building the rails for this whole crypto economy. So you've got it's just fun. Nothing is ever the same every day. And it's always interesting, new, challenging topics. So
yeah, it's great. It's always new things to learn, always just new challenges. And what's really refreshing is, at least in my life, there's probably only one or two other people in my personal life that I can talk crypto with at like any amount of depth, and maybe like one person like super in depth. Everyone else, any conversation just immediately gets stopped because I'm like, oh my goodness, I have to explain. There's so much I have to explain to you to even get to the conversation of, you want to talk about the security question. It's like there's so much ground we have to cover just to get to the Howey test, So it's great where we can kind of, at least in this line of work, everyone's kind of speaking the same language, So it's been awesome.
Mm-hmm. Nice. And yeah, speaking of the Howey test, there's rumors of the SEC investigating the Bored Ape Yacht Club. What do you think of that? I know we haven't really talked that much about NFTs and their security implications in any of our work yet. So curious, I shared you a thread of the one guy that went through a really in-depth analysis. He claimed he's a crypto lawyer. But I was curious, Bill, what do you think of that thread and the whole topic in general?
Yeah. So, I mean, Yuga Labs, they've gotten so big I figured it was probably only a matter of time until, SEC comes knocking. Um, I think the challenge that Yuga Labs faces on the security question is they have really expanded their offerings beyond just NFTs. So if we're operating in a vacuum and we take them back to just the bored apes and just, we've got these NFTs, people can purchase them. It's like social status. People like art, and the values explode, not really because of them, but because of kind of the meme kind of potential of the we're going to ape in, right? Like monkey time. Joe Rogan probably played a part in that. We're going to ape into this coin, and they exploded. I think in that kind of vacuum, Yuga probably has a pretty cut and dry argument of like, this is art. These aren't securities. This is just property. But then they add complications. So there was like the mutant ape airdrop, where certain uh, ape owners got some other NFT that they could use to mint a mutant ape, and those are, of course, those skyrocketed in value. So that's like maybe a little bit more suspicious. And now they have the virtual real estate, right, of their metaverse, and that complicates things even more. I think with the information we have, I think they probably still have a strong argument that it's not a security. But there's, the SEC's how we test really, in some ways, goes beyond just the proms. They've got all these other factors that they weigh in mysterious amounts. At least they won't tell us, right? They're vague. That bring in other considerations. And I think Yuga Labs needs to be well aware that however they build their metaverse or carry their company in the future, that this is a risk because, like I've always said, the SEC generally is not charitable regarding crypto companies.
I would tend to agree with you there. Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting. Like, so I wasn't even aware that they did that airdrop, but typically an airdrop, I've always viewed it as something that's not, it doesn't meet the first prong of the Howey test, but it could be seen in this case as a dividend. So if it's a dividend, then it's its own enumerated type of security. But if we're just looking at the investment contract analysis, there's no payment of money. Although, the SEC will probably argue, well, they paid money the first time to get the initial bored ape, and then by owning that, they get an airdrop. But if you separate it out, then that airdrop shouldn't be. And if the airdrop is just art too, it's like you're allowed to give say you're an artist and you have a lot of fans and you want to give them something like a bonus content or something like that. I don't think that inherently makes it a security, but it's all a really tight, fine line in this case because the money was so high. Like, it's millions of dollars for these things. And it's like, well, if this is just art, why is it millions of dollars for a JPEG? But if you look at the traditional art world, there's no telling, like making myself not seem like a very sophisticated art connoisseur, but like, why is a banana taped to a wall worth $100,000? Is like the way art is valued is very subjective and depends on the artist and their reputation. And so, yeah, I don't want to see these turn into securities because then it will make such a mess for the whole NFT industry. And where would they trade? They'd have to go on the formal stock exchange. Well, no formal stock exchanges set up to sell bored apes. So if they were deemed securities, they just couldn't exist. And then everyone if the SEC's goal is to protect people, well, what does that kind of do? It makes everyone's investment into them or, purchase of them thus far valueless because they won't be able to be sold or resold. There'll be no aftermarket for them if they're deemed securities. So it's just going to hurt everyone. And I just wish they would back off a little bit.
I'm personally of the opinion that I should be allowed to gamble my money, but I definitely get, the idea is you don't want predatory, companies going after or trying to scam retail investors. But, I think the tricky thing for the bored apes is, like you kind of alluded to, with the valuation and kind of the whole market that's kind of spawned around them. The SEC, it's not in the Howey test, but in a lot of the SEC's letters, they talk about intent. right? Like, are people buying this for a speculative purpose? Or when people buy this, are they expecting to, for example, maybe get an airdrop, right?
Mhm.
Um, that I don't know if there's any way around that. Like, who buys? I'm sure there's some people who buy Bored Apes for clout, certainly, but I would have to imagine that after the precedent set, there are plenty of people who purchase it because they're like, well, it's a monkey. People like monkeys, number go up, right?
Mhm.
So that might be a trickier kind of part of it. But SEC is so vague on kind of these other non-Howie factors. They're like, oh, well, we consider this, and then they list like 20 different factors, and we really are given no indication as to how much one is weighed, short of the SEC just going like, these in particular we will consider indicative of something being like a utility token. And
Mhm.
that's frustrating on like the law part, and I'm sure it is for you also. But unless Congress gets some legislation out there, I don't know what else we can expect.
Yeah.
From the SEC.
And it's almost like I don't think that legislation is going to be good whenever it comes. It's going to say that they're all securities or create some new asset class and they can only trade in a, centralized exchange. Probably like they'll say, oh, Coinbase is registered as an alternative trading platform. We're comfortable with their level of expertise for custodying people's assets and for making the right kind of risk disclosures before an asset's listed. So all trading has to be done through Coinbase or, other similar, platforms. Maybe Gemini will be granted the green light, or, places that are already registered like T0, but it won't be allowed to continue on decentralized platforms, which to me, that's the whole innovation going on here, is the peer-to-peer decentralized network. And if they put it all on Coinbase, sure, it'll still be kind of fun for people making the art and stuff, but it's, people on the OFAC regions, they won't be able to participate, or it's just going to change the whole dynamic. Like I've seen people in the rare Pepe community, the artists from Venezuela, they came in the early community and they made money for their whole families selling these pictures of frogs.
Because I
But
know OpenSea has delisted things. Now you could still, exchange NFTs elsewhere, right, on a peer-to-peer basis. But if I recall correctly, OpenSea did axe some collections, or at least remove them from like being searchable. And I'm like, okay, well, now we're basically back to where we started.
yeah. So I guess that, it's not that different. If I think that's what Congress probably would prescribe, is some centralized platform, and I guess that's already where we kind of have. So, but OpenSea doesn't require KYC, does it?
No.
Yeah, so I guess that will be the difference. Everyone will have to
Hmm.
KYC, and then it'll give you a tax report at the end of your year for your, NFT
Yeah.
trading, which, in some senses that my husband, he'll be pissed if I talk about it really, but he's so worried about his taxes because it's so hard to calculate when you're trading on all these different platforms and everything to really get a true number, that I think he would almost be rather someone tell him, here's what you owe, and it's just that simple versus trying to calculate.
Yeah.
And mhm.
Thousands of transactions, many on different chains, using exchanges that really don't track anything.
Mhm.
I can't imagine that people can 100% comply. And actually, I'm writing a paper on that
Oh,
for
are
law
you?
school. Where I'm working with my tax professor on like the challenges of taxing blockchain. The short version is it's a nightmare,
Yeah.
and it's unknown. So it's like I'm looking at my own transactions. I'm like, oh my goodness, like I have no idea what happened here. But the IRS probably doesn't know what happened either. If you're someone who did thousands upon thousands of transactions. I mean, IRS has alluded to, they've got Operation Hidden Treasure or whatever. But it's like, what do you do when something just uses, if you have thousands of transactions and some of those transactions are taking bridges to like different chains? Where do you even begin untangling that? Like, are you going to subpoena wormhole to cough up the transactions from that one address? I suppose that's fine. But what if you have 10,000 addresses?
Yeah, the
Then
scope of
that's not
it
so easy.
it's too vast for anyone to figure out with accuracy, I think, unless you're crazy about keeping records every time you do a transaction. But
Yeah,
from
which is good practice.
yeah, that's the best practice.
Mm.
But yeah, it's taxing it would be easier, I guess, for the government if everyone used a centralized platform.
Hey, taxes on the blockchain, you know. Imagine if we could just have that instead of doing all your forms and everything, you just have a blockchain and the smart contract takes care of it all. It'd be pretty nice.
Oh, how would that work?
So one of my professors wrote a paper on that. His name is Professor Charles Delmotte. He wrote a whole kind of paper about what taxes would look like on the blockchain. And for the purpose of the paper, the scope is kind of narrowed to, well, let's put the sales tax on the blockchain. And kind of the idea is whenever you purchase something, it's kind of like your social security number. Everyone has a wallet of some kind. And when the transaction happens, the government just automatically pulls its tax and you don't have to worry about it. So the smart contract just takes care of everything and the government gets its tax sooner. And in the meanwhile, we're not burdened with the whatever billions of dollars it costs to comply. Um, Now, of course, that brings up other issues. And there's a section in the paper about things like privacy concerns. This obviously implies the CBDC eventually being used. Like that just makes sense to go together. But in terms of eliminating the cost of compliance, which is basically just wasted economic potential, a blockchain system does show promise in certain applications like that, as long as you can get over the privacy concerns.
Yeah, which are they're I think the core of the innovation of the whole technology. So if we go into that system, it's like I hope we don't get there, but
Yeah,
it
no,
looks like
it's
that's where it's all funneling. So yeah.
no, exactly. I think if blockchain is as groundbreaking as we think it is, highly likely government's going to try to get a piece of the pie. Now, but we already live in a cross-chain world, so I don't think it's the end of days, so to speak. I don't think Ethereum is going to get banned. What I suspect maybe is we have like GovChain, right? Whatever that may be, and you've got your CBDC, but ETH still exists in the form that we understand that. Maybe with a more crypto-friendly government, you'd be able to bridge things like USDC. Probably not, but it's a thought. But I don't think necessarily those two things have to be exclusive because I think the government centralized chain is inevitable. Like that's definitely coming. The question is can it coexist with the decentralized future that we obviously all know and love?
Mm-hmm. Which I think it can. I think there'll be two avenues. Like one, this centralized like government coin that most people will end up using, and then there'll be outside of that, there'll be the Bitcoin and maybe Ethereum and all the coins won't go away. They'll just be used outside of that, and people will have to use them on maybe Tor network or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully not. Hopefully we don't.
Oh
see
yeah, I was like that's a dark future. I don't want to think about that. Then
yeah.
I'm in trouble.
Yeah. Well,
who am I going to be the lawyer for if you can only be a blockchain on an underground network?
Yeah, true. Yeah, and the US laws don't apply to global. Like the global rules are so much more relaxed for everything. I mean, they are strict and they are becoming tighter as we speak in Europe with the MiCA legislation, but generally, for the last decade, it's been a lot easier to operate in the blockchain world overseas than it has in America. But they all want to sell to Americans because that's where the money is really. So
yeah, and I think that's probably the strongest argument for America to be crypto friendly. It's like, okay, well, crypto is going to grow whether you like it or not. The question is do you want to be a leader or do you want to be a follower? And in that case, who's going to be the leader? China? Well, that doesn't sound like a good idea. So hopefully, I think that's probably one of our strongest arguments when it comes to convincing the U.S. government that, hey, this is new, it's scary, we get it, but this is going to grow just like the internet. And if U.S. wants to remain technologically dominant, we gotta adapt.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, and then it's like, well, we could talk about this later, you did a report for us on the cryptocurrency and cybercrime, and it had some interesting things in there that made it not so scary to the government as I thought it was gonna show up, that most of crypto is used for crime, or at least half of it, but it showed up at like what was it, 0.2% or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, on that stat specifically, in 2021, out of all the transactions executed on the blockchain, only 0.15% of the transactions came from illicit addresses, which is insanely low.
Yeah.
So even if we were to give the data kind of like that, even if we weren't going to be charitable, it's like you could double that and it's still super low. And it's a big improvement from the 2020 number, which was 0.62% of all transactions. So we're trending in the right direction. And I think when it comes to like the cybercrime thing, crypto, it's really an education problem in that people, when they hear Bitcoin, they still think, oh, people are buying drugs or what have you off the dark net. Even though it's like the fact that Bitcoin can be traced actually makes it like one of the worst things to do that with. But that's kind of like the impression, I think, in a lot of just, dare I say, lay people's heads. But you look at the data, and I think the data is actually quite strong for us in that, okay, yes, we acknowledge crime exists. Crime exists with virtually all financial currencies, but at least with crypto, crypto does provide some tools that law enforcement can use to hopefully, reduce the amount of activity that's being done. And also, just like the numbers just aren't very significant compared to, traditional financial crimes. I mean, when you get traditional financial crimes, you get like, Bernie Madoff for 2008, right? I think most people would call that a crime.
Yeah.
So I think that the crime report is quite good for crypto, especially if you parse the numbers.
Mm-hmm. Um, yeah, agreed. And the money laundering and scams, like I said, there's two types of cybercrime that have been most prevalent in the last 3 years, money laundering and cyber crimes. But I was just shocked, like how low was from the dark net and stuff like that. Maybe can you just run through the whole report for us?
Yeah. So
The
the
highlights.
yeah. So I think probably the most relevant parts. I mean, yeah, they're like you mentioned, kind of the darknet transactions are a fairly small amount compared to things like what we would call, rug pulls or exploits, hacks. Those are kind of the ones that make the headline news. X protocol was compromised for, on X amount of hundreds of millions of dollars. I think the wormhole exploit was about that much, like $100 million. And those are really what makes up, the majority of like the total stolen funds. Like for 2021, we got, 7.8 billion from scams and 2.8 billion from rug pulls. The lines between those two things is probably fairly hazy, but a lot of it isn't like criminal activity, as in people are selling drugs. It's people are targeting this very young technology and they're finding exploits. Crypto's grown tremendously fast. You have, billions and billions of dollars, right, circulating among the protocols. And anytime you have kind of early technology, there's going to be weaknesses. So generally when we see exploits, it's either on bridges. So, the big one was like the wormhole hack. Ronin Bridge was another big one. Where you're transferring a token from chain A to chain B, and as a Vitalik, the creator of Ethereum, as he says, cross-chain protocols have inherent security risks that not easy to solve. So they're targeting protocols like that, and they're also targeting just regular DeFi protocols that have large amount of capital. So like farms, exchanges, lending protocols. Mango Markets was one of the biggest kind of decentralized exchange on Solana, where you could do leverage trading and you could borrow, earn interest on your deposits. Americans not allowed, of course, but they recently got exploited through a flat. Well, I don't think it was a flash loan attack technically. It was an Oracle exploit in that the attackers manipulated the price feeds from the Pith and switchboard oracles in order to withdraw just like ludicrous amounts of money from the protocol that the protocol thought was okay, but the oracles weren't reading the right price. So I think they took a similar amount, like 150 million from that. So those are kind of examples of really those are the high profile. You're looking at what kind of crimes, what kind of scams are being committed. Those are like the high profile ones. And then you probably have tons of smaller ones, which is, we call the rug pulls where, remember on the smart contract, anybody can mint a token. Anybody can go on Telegram. Telegram is the most popular probably avenue for this kind of promotion. You can mint a coin, typically a fork of SHIB or Doge, some kind of reflection token, which I mean, SHIB was technically a fork of RFI, but not to get off track. They'll fork a token, usually a meme or a current event, and they will heavily shill it. It'll start with like $1,000 in liquidity. No joke. So you do like $100 buy order, you're looking at like 40% slippage, which is insane. But enough people FOMO in that these coins explode to sometimes tens of millions of market cap. And so for those who could buy it when it was like 1,000 market cap, goodness gracious, that's big money. But these happen all the time, during the bull market. It was just crazy. It was almost an industry. People dubbed it the BSC casino because no one was using ETH because the gas was too high. But yeah, those are, I think when it comes to where's this illegal money coming from in terms of being stolen from the blockchain, those are kind of some big examples.
Mm-hmm. And those Telegram groups or the coins like that, I haven't actually participated in any of those Telegram rooms, but I've seen a lot of, like, I'm always contacted by someone saying, hey, are you interested in cryptocurrency? It's usually a gorgeous female. At first it was a scam where they were trying to get you to send them a little Bitcoin and they'd send you back double. And I think it's just kind of grown from there saying, hey, buy this, this is the next meme coin. But I'm always confused by how people are scammed by it, or like what's wrong with these people?
Well,
see it's a scam.
Well, let me give you a good example. So, teams, remember, teams can, a lot of this is about presentation. And if you're trying to run a meme coin scam, these teams actually invest like a fair amount of money to kind of grow their brand for a bit. So they'll get a very professional Twitter page. They'll, get some, AI generated bios, profile pictures for the team. They'll create LinkedIn pages, they'll create professional websites, right? And they'll do the roadmap, the white paper. They'll build all of this so that to, someone who doesn't know much about crypto, maybe they're in a few Telegram groups and some people go, hey, check this out. It's kind of making the rounds. They go, oh, you look at the website, you go, oh, there's the guy who's in charge. There's a link to his LinkedIn, sounds great. And so you invest, and these guys, they keep the ruse going for a period of time until the coin reaches, maybe a couple million in market cap, at which point there's probably about 100 grand worth of, on BSC, like there's probably 100 grand worth of BNB in the liquidity pool for the token. And then what they do is they just pull the liquidity. Goodbye, and whatever, maybe they spend, between 1 and 5 grand on all the setup, but so you just snag, $100,000. It makes it worth it. So, and the only way to determine if they're not going to pull the liquidity is either you've got to determine that they're legit. So that's hard at times, or you have to be smart enough to look in the smart contract to see if liquidity is unlocked, right? See who owns those keys. And sometimes it's not so easy. The scammers have gotten so smart, the arms race between the scammers and I guess the retail people just keeps going on. They're going to hide. They're going to have a MasterChef contract that migrates the code. It's bad. It's not easy. It's not as like simple as, okay, a hot lady DM'd me asking me for my private keys. The scams have sometimes, even to me, shockingly evolved to be very complex.
These people that aren't super into Bitcoin or DeFi that just maybe they've only been in the market a few months or trying to make a quick buck. They think Bitcoin or Ethereum's like too old and not enough pump potential. So they're like, okay, I'm getting in on this. This is the next Dogecoin pump. I'm here for it.
Mhm.
And then they are probably going to the CFTC and the SEC and complaining after they get rugged, saying, hey, what the heck? You guys should have protected me. And then that's what's prompting things like the Uki DAO getting that, getting
Mhm.
taken down. And this report that you were looking at, the cryptocurrency and cybercrime, it really did show the DeFi protocols being the areas where there is
Mhm.
more of that.
I think it's still illegal. It's probably pretty clearly securities fraud. These people are marketing the token, saying it's going to increase in value. They're like, we're going to buy billboards. We're going to buy marketing. We're going to pay celebrities to shill our token, right? So I think I mean, that's the SEC's worst nightmare. you know,
Yeah, yeah.
in some ways. But yeah, these people, I'm sure, complain, and I'm sure it's on the SEC's radar. So I guess we only have ourselves to blame in some ways.
Yeah.
That's what we get for being the Wild West.
Yeah, yeah. Well, what did you think about the Lex Punk DAO group of lawyers challenging the service that the CFTC?
Yeah, so this was hilarious. I never thought I would see the CFTC deliver service through Telegram. I'm like, through Telegram? Really now? And their username is like CFTC enforcement in all caps. And I was like, you know what I do? I see that and I'm like, oh, nice try, scammer. Delete.
Yeah, yeah.
that's what that's what I do. So I mean, obviously completely ridiculous. Try to start through Telegram, and they're like, oh yeah, we're trying to message like the help bot, and I'm like, no one uses the help bot. No one's gonna see that. So that's and if you go on the forum, yeah, I checked out the UkiDAO forum, and yep, the CFTC's post is right there, and their username all caps CFTC enforcement. And then they created a second thread to post something else, and the mod was like, "Can you please keep this to one thread?" And then they didn't, and then they didn't respond. So they don't even have good forum etiquette. But yeah, I don't know. I think I'm with you. I listened to some of your podcasts about it. Completely ridiculous, especially the Telegram thing. That's just insane. But
Mhm.
it is a good question to ask. It's like, well, how do we serve DAOs where no one stocks? Like this isn't, that's really an excellent question. And I listened to some of Commissioner Mercinger's dissent, and what she basically says is like this is really unknown territory. We shouldn't be regulating through enforcement. We should put out a forum for questions, get some more info, really discuss this issue instead of just bringing the hammer down in a way where it's like, can you even bring the hammer down? That's a good question.
Mhm.
But at least in her opinion, though, she thought that UkiDAO absolutely was like violating rules, particularly when they, like you said, poked the bear, so to speak, right? Which is generally not wise. By targeting, they basically said you can dodge KYC, we can dodge enforceability, so come trade here. And so as long as they're serving U.S. customers, Commissioner Mercinger says that we probably do have jurisdiction over something like
Mhm. But they need, and what's going to happen if no one responds, then it's just going to go to a default notice. Like the CFTC will
that.
just win by default. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. But I love that the Lex Punk army has, come in and said, hey, I think coin. Actually, someone else, and I don't have the name top of mind right now, but someone else joined as well. So now there's
Yeah,
two groups who have said, hey, you need to do more than sending these documents to Telegram for it to actually be considered service.
right. And to be clear, it was sent to Telegram and also the UkiDAO forum, which I think like if I'm the CFTC, like the Telegram thing, I think is pretty much indefensible. But the CFTC, they have, I think, an argument. It's hard for me to say how strong that is because I guess I haven't really looked into the case law behind forum service, if any. But it's like, okay, well, they did post a thread on the UkiDAO forum with all the information and people saw it, so maybe that's one of the CFTC's stronger arguments. But yeah, I'm going to be following it closely. And I saw that the judge did allow Lex Punk and the other group to at least do amicus curiae briefs, right?
That's right.
So, and then he'll reconsider or potentially reconsider. I guess we don't know for sure.
Yeah.
So we'll have to follow that closely because this is new ground. This is we're blazing a path.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
exciting.
And I saw one person though, not to be Debbie Downer, but one seemed like a more seasoned attorney in the Lex Punk Telegram room saying, "Hey, you guys are actually off base here because there's lots of case law that says alternative service in the way the CFTC did it is acceptable and standard." Those weren't on DAOs. There's a lot of case law around how you serve, but the Lex Punk group, they have a good argument here too, that you need at least for someone to agree and acknowledge that they've accepted service. And it really comes down to the fundamentals of what is a DAO. If it's a decentralized technology that's autonomous, autonomous in terms of it doesn't need people to function behind it, then who are you actually serving? There's so many of these DAO groups, and I don't know whether Uki is or not a centralized group of people behind it, but I know there are certain DAOs that at least the Lex Punk Army believes are actually autonomous in their functioning, and they just function by these votes, and it's a smart contract basis. And in those cases, they're not capable of being served a lawsuit because they're not a person. Kind of the same as the OFAC arguments that, against Tornado Cash, like you can't put OFAC's, sanctions on code. Well,
they're going after the developers, right?
The developers
and I'm
are
like,
in
well,
jail.
that's yeah. I'm like, that's not right. Certainly not.
Yeah. So.
And I think part of Mersinger's dissent was like, I think the CFTC is just targeting anyone who voted, basically, as like
Yeah.
a member, as a
Yeah.
member of the the unincorporated group. So and she was like, well, that doesn't sound wise. Like that just sounds extremely arbitrary. What if you just didn't vote but still had tokens and used the service? Do you not count? What if you voted on something meaningless? Like these are all questions that we need answers to. So at least with the Lex Punk army, hopefully at a minimum, like who knows who's gonna win, but at a minimum we need some answers. And
Yeah.
I
And
think we're
at
gonna get
least a
those.
voice for DAOs being, contributing there. That it's Gabriel Shapiro's the main attorney behind it, or I think he's the creator. I had him on my show back a couple years ago, but he's been just incredible voice for the space, like advocating for DAOs. So I was glad to see they took that action. Yeah. And then for the last story, what's your take on some of these bans? Like we saw Kanye West getting banned, and then PayPal with this ADL partnership. What do you think this cancel culture is going to do for the space?
Well, if anything, I think it's probably one of our best advertisements. People are concerned about cancel culture, and the thought of it going beyond just, okay, well, I just got banned from Facebook too. Oh, well, now I can't use my bank account. That's like, oh, I'm in trouble. So people are going to be looking for alternate avenues of, running their finances. And I think, decentralized crypto, for the most part, is basically the perfect solution with, maybe some hiccups that we work out in the future. But I think it's very strong evidence of kind of the problems with the current financial system, and that everything is so centralized, and people are so partisan these days that I think there can be plenty of fear on both sides. I mean, the right might be worried about it, but the left was during the civil rights era, for example. You saw civil rights organizations just get stomped in the South, not being allowed to organize. I'm sure they weren't allowed to buy things. And we're like, okay, well, that's not right. So I think a financial system that is kind of not beholden to political interests will probably be, of interest for anyone who's kind of seeing, what's going on now.
Agreed. Yeah. And now we might have maybe Kanye will make some rap songs about it.
Yes, Kanye, pump my bags.
Yeah.
I have a feeling it's going to be a Yeezy coin, and
Yeah.
then the SEC will come knocking.
Well, Kim just got that, he's
Hmm.
probably well aware of her recent
Yeah.
um charge, but yeah, it's just getting ridiculous. I remember when it started and we saw Alex Jones getting canceled, and so many people thought, well, he's so crazy and out there, he deserves to be canceled. But then it's like once that line's crossed, they just can cancel anyone for anything. And getting a bank account taken away isn't anything that new for anyone in the crypto industry. For the last 7 or 8 years, I've seen so many
Mhm.
clients lose their bank accounts, and it's the worst thing to happen when you're relying on the bank to process transactions, and you get 30 days and you have to go create another account. And often these companies will build themselves up so high that they have these huge transaction volumes that the other bank maybe got comfortable with,
Mhm.
but when you're starting at a new bank, it's like money coming from Paxful or different Bitcoin exchanges. It just makes the bank very uncomfortable. So sometimes once they lose their main account, then they have to start over a new bank, then that gets canceled. And it just, finding banking partnerships is like the hardest thing for companies. So hopefully Kanye won't have, another bank will just be glad to take him. And he probably has so much money in there that, it's really, profit driven for a bank to take on whatever risk they feel. But it's hard to see where this comes from. Like what criteria did they use to shut him down? And in America, they don't even need any criteria. It's just, oh, we
Mhm.
feel suspicious about this account, or we're no longer comfortable with this risk, and then you're on your
Then
own.
goodbye. Yeah, it's a tough balance between, liberty as in control of your business versus, some businesses are so big, right? I mean, there's those that talk about, Twitter being the new public square, for example, right? At what point does a service become so big that it becomes kind of a rights issue when they start acting on kind of those more arbitrary, factors? So I mean, people will always say, oh, well, free speech, you only have freedom of speech from the government. And I'm like, well, is that really where we want to be like drawing the line there? You know, um, Imagine if BP, or something started petitioning banks to like close the accounts for environmental groups, right? Then are you going to say, oh, well, they're free to do that because they don't like what they're saying? I'm like, well, that doesn't sound wise. This is the very typical like who watches the watchers problem, where even when the companies have maybe good intentions, like PayPal and the ADL, they're like, oh, well, we want to, not fund hate groups or, racists, whatever label they decide to throw out. It's like, okay, well, maybe in a vacuum, that sounds great, but who determines who's a hate group or who's a racist? It
Yeah.
becomes harder, when there's no oversight.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's a fight. I will always be the free speech maximalist. So
Yeah.
I'm against probably all of these things. I think freedom of speech is very important, not just from the government, but from any large institution that might be able to destroy your life. Because you have to be able to speak. And there's so many countries where we've seen kind of the chilling effect of what happens when free speech gets clamped down on. And I think honestly, I think this is a bipartisan take
Yeah.
where both sides should want freedom of speech. It's like we can argue about perspectives and use of speech later, but I would think that activists would be some of the most vocal defenders of speech
Yeah.
because they rely on that to make the changes that they want to make. So you have to be careful.
Yeah. I feel
Cancel someone tomorrow, you might get canceled today.
yeah. I remember a while back, JK Rowling posting something about like, well, can someone explain Bitcoin to me? And Adam Back went on and told her, hey, you've been a little bit, vocal about the trans culture, that could one day end up with you getting your bank account canceled, or people won't be able to pay for your book, and then you can't sell your work because of your political view. And it was a few years ago, and he got all these people commenting that would never happen, that's so outrageous. And I think we've moved so far today that anyone can see, especially after what happened in Canada with the truckers, like people are still don't have their access to PayPal accounts if they donated to that movement. And it's just it's coming. So, and then once that CBDC rolls out, if it does, then that'll be even more like, if you view the wrong thing, or you do anything against what the government wants. Or we saw it with the vaccine, I think was the most prevalent spot, where it was like, if anyone said anything, it was considered misinformation, like if you're just questioning that narrative. And I feel like the ability to speak out has come back. Like, it's no longer such a scary thing. But it was not only coming from the government, or you were worried that, like, Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, everything was flagging anything you post as being misinformation if it wasn't along that narrative. But it almost was a chilling effect just from the social side of it. Like, everyone that had gotten the vaccine was ready to jump all over you if they thought you were questioning it. And so so many people went quiet during that period. And then now it's like, oh, now people can talk again, and it's only a few months later. But I just feel there's been a big difference in how it's viewed today versus months ago. But what will the next thing be? And now that the tyrants have seen how effective they can be, hopefully they don't come out with the next thing, and it's even worse. But yeah, free speech is something we need to protect at all
absolutely
costs. Yeah.
It's it's scary stuff. And I think people these days get so bogged down in the specifics of the arguments of like what you should say or what you should not say. Like, if you have an audience, you maybe have to be careful what you say, sure, but at the end of the day, you really need to be careful with the precedents you are setting. If maybe someone's anti-vax, right, and they get banned, then you might think, oh, well, that's, if you're like a pro-vaccine person, I think, oh, well, that's great, that's fantastic, good, they're gone. But then, you try to post about something that you care about, maybe let's say something about, the banks making improper decisions during the 2008 financial crisis. Oops, now you're gone too. It's like, oh, well, now it's not so funny anymore now, is it?
Or abortion. Like, it's like the total opposite
yeah
mindset of like, my body, my choice when it comes to an abortion. But when it comes to a vaccine, like, oh no, your body, government's choice. And so the people could come out like completely different on that issue. And then, they, we'll see.
Yeah. I don't know. I just think it's shocking kind of how far certain groups, have gone to like the anti-free speech side. I remember, well, I don't remember because I wasn't there, but I know I learned in history class, in 1978, the ACLU defended the rights of the local neo-Nazi chapter to march. And, these people obviously are hideous, and the ACLU opposes everything they stand for. But the ACLU knew, they're like, well, if these guys lose their rights to organize, that means in the event where we need to organize for the rights of a particular group of people, that precedent could be used against us. So they were willing, they had the foresight to see that free speech is more than just what is being said. It's the right for that thing to be said without retaliation.
Yeah. I might not like what you say, but I'll defend your right to say it.
Exactly.
Well, Bill, thank you so much for going through all this. You're very well spoken, and I really enjoyed the conversation. So thank you.
Thanks, Sasha, for having me.
Oh, no problem. Thanks for all the great work.
It was great. It was a blast.
Where can people find you? Are you on Twitter or LinkedIn, or where do you?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn. I sometimes post about crypto sometimes. But yeah, just LinkedIn Bill Wise. I'm sure we can stick a link somewhere in the description. But yeah, it's follow me and watch me observe some cataclysmic events when they happen. I'll generally post in real time when crazy things are occurring. So that can be
Awesome.
hopefully informative.
Very good. Well, thank you and enjoy the rest of your Friday.
Absolutely. Thanks, Sasha.